But what I'm mostly interested in is following what inspires me. If you like a picture by somebody, try to figure it out. Make it a puzzle, make it a game. Um, if you don't like something that really you disagree with, figure out why, right? Don't be kind of passive about it or just move on. So in this one, let's take a look at David and Goliath by Peter Paul Rubens. Sometimes it could be fun to try to break down an image when you know the story. So the last two, Angra and Egon Schiele, we looked at were images that you might not know the content, or it's more obscure, harder to figure out. So maybe start with something that you have a basic idea or appreciation of in terms of, a lot of the earlier paintings might be based on Greek myth or biblical stories. And so you could try to figure out from there how the different components of your foundations are supporting compositional intent by having a clear understanding of the outcome. Like we know the idea of David and Goliath, right, is kind of overcoming odds, small versus big, all that kind of stuff. So it's David. And so I'm definitely hopscotching through history. Now I'm in the Baroque with Rubens. So I started with 1800s, moved up, now going back. But I'm not concerned with it being linear or getting a solid appreciation of the movements in art history. I mean, that's super important for a working knowledge. But what I'm mostly interested in is that really you disagree with. Figure out why. Right? Don't be kind of passive about it or just move on. So what do I notice about this? Well, I think, so maybe let's say I'm having a hard time noticing anything. So I'm going to start by putting in my basic axes, the vertical, the horizontal, real loosely, diagonals, right? That gives me an ability to practice my straights and how well or how bad I make them. So all of this is kind of built in. And maybe I put this in just so I have a framework to try to understand how things are working. Like, for example, early on here, I can observe that the center is avoided. So this is not a symmetrical picture, right? There's nothing deliberately on top of that. And most pictures will try to avoid that. Now, I still want to find what unifies something and then what component or what role variety plays within that. So that's still my aim. And so in order to work my way to this first, generally I'll say, well, what is most striking? What's the focal point? Where does my eye go first? Sometimes that's a good way to approach what's giving something a unifying quality. And it's definitely the main figure there. And that main figure appears to be on something close to the golden mean, right? So let's say that the stance of that figure would be there. And then maybe we could say that if I follow it across like the leg or back of Goliath on the ground, that maybe that's a golden mean, a dirty golden mean, like we've been talking about before. Not something that's, we're not going to do like a mathematical breakdown of that ratio. So I think that's giving it a unifying quality. So that's another instance of me seeing that format as a substructure to the picture and how it's made. So I feel confident about that, but I could be wrong because we're just, trying to figure stuff out as we go. So now I'm going to start to look for variety. And in these videos, I've primarily been focusing on how line and shape are working, right? Because the focus in these the focus in all my videos is how drawing mimics a thinking process. How are you thinking with drawing? So in these more recent videos that have to do with composition, it's how are your components of thinking, line, straight, value, color, how are those driving the thought towards something that is more content oriented? How does form support content? Thanks for watching. I wanted to let you know that if you've been enjoying the content, whether it's figure construction, composition, or anatomy, and like to have a little bit more in terms of a focused, laid out course, I'm releasing a new one on my website titled From Mannequin to Character, Designing the Figure. And the reason for this course is it's in response to a common question I get from students, which is basically, how can I learn a way to draw the figure, set up a mannequin that's also able to be invented without getting buried in anatomical detail and memorization, or to put it more simply, how can I learn anatomy without learning all the anatomy? That's the real impetuous or reason for making this course. Enjoyable one to make because it's allowed for like an exploration of a simpler build. We get to design and think about body type and hence, character a little bit more quickly. I also get to do a little bit of history in it, which is, my main interest. We look at some famous illustrators and break down their character and their body type. But I think it'll be a unique course, especially because for pre-sale, I'm going to be doing 2 to 3 hour live sessions. Now that will be recorded. It will take student feedback and questions and try to add those into the course so that it becomes as comprehensive as possible for this subject. If you're interested, if it sounds appealing, you could check out the link in my bio, or you can go to figuredrawing.info and check out the download section and see the specifics there. Hope to see you in class. And so in doing that, I'm not putting a lot of work into rendering these. I don't care about making a finished picture. I'm trying to break them into a diagrammatic explanation of the way that foundations elicit content. But we can make notes. We can say, value is doing this, color is doing that, even if the goal here isn't to create a full rendering. I think rendering snaps us right back into that objective mindset where I'm no longer thinking about the reason for doing. I'm now ego obsessed with, did I get the rendering on the medial head of the tricep right? Does it look as good? Am I going to be as celebrated for this rendering, right? So it seems like a slippery slope for me. Now let's try to put in some, let's use line to see if we can block out some bigger shapes. So I'm just going to start with this placement here for the figure. And let's say, where's that head? Well, maybe the head's like in this area. Real loose, right? Because I'm just trying to organize and understand space. I don't want to commit to too much. So here's my shoulder line. He's got this great stance. So here's the back. Here's head. You can use whatever lay-in you like for this, but I'm trying to go with something that's, in terms of a mannequin, going to give me a quicker resemblance for shape, just because I want to think as quickly as possible about the positive, negative shape relationships in this. So here's torso, let's say. Hip is just kind of below that center. So I'm going to say this is like the area, the general area of the pelvis. I think this is a really interesting placement for the leg because of how horizontal it is. So generally I don't, in a lot of pictures, studying pictures, I don't see as much mimicking that horizontal. Usually as soon as we do that to a body part anywhere, it starts to feel static because it's echoing the division or the bounding space of the frame. So maybe it has a little bit of a diagonal to it that ultimately is here. Maybe the knee is a little bit closer in. And then this other leg it's really interesting, like almost a crouch, because it's not fully extended. It's almost like he's kind of leaping into this chop, or in the process of leaping in. I also like kind of studying these because sometimes these older ones, the poses are invented, or they feel invented because it doesn't look like anyone would have posed for that or held that. So it helps you kind of disconnect from needing it to look like a picture, and instead you can think about the reason for the pose. Then this lower leg has more of a diagonal orientation. And so that's what I think is the main figure. That's what holds that space of the golden mean. That's what creates that attention to what I described as unifying the picture. Here's some explanation for these hands and forearms that are holding the sword. And so just giving that basic placement and idea of that main figure. Now, what is the reason that stands out so much to me? Well, the reason is value, right? That's the lightest light against the darkest area. I should say it differently. It's the lightest, darkest contrast in the picture. So my eye goes there first. Even though I'm focused more on line, of course, that's just a nod to the areas that we're not going to speak as much about. So that's unifying the picture for me. Now, what is supporting the picture? Well, if we're being more systematic about this, one thing I could do is find your focal point. If I'm starting to now have an interest in figuring and following what might create variety in the picture, and see if you can follow the eye out into the space of the picture and then back up and into the main area of focus. Like you're just trying to create some kind of pathway. So what do I notice as I move out of the space of the head, forearms, hands? Well, there's a really bold rim light to the clouds, right? And then there's a lot of dark in this corner to light. So that helps me understand maybe Rubens thinking about the quality of corners as a trap. Corners are this constant trap that we want to be moving the eye out and away from. So what I think is interesting is in his use of the clouds, even look at this, just like kind of simplify back the shape. There seems to be a deliberate echoing, or sometimes I'll refer to this as thematic repetition of the arm and then the shape of the cloud. One seems to emulate the other here. And that helps me to kind of build a continuity or a sense of familiarity between the two, to a likeness of things that prevents me from wanting to move out, move away. Keeps me involved in the thinking or the design of the figure. There's also here this, if I continue down, this rim light on the top of the cloud. That basically acts to me as a prompt. It's a diagonal prompt that moves my eye back in. And then what happens here is there's more. So remember, diagonals aren't just this thing we practice to become efficient at making lines. They're the most active line and produce a great quality of movement. So look at all the diagonals being used. There's diagonal. So it's like Rubens was practicing his diagonals everywhere. Diagonal, diagonal. Where else do I see diagonal? And then look at how this army, let's say this army isn't bodies, singular bodies that we should copy and study. It's a mass. It's a mass that is moving with that prompt of diagonal. And what that army is doing is presenting, or it's creating this feeling of some kind of charge, because they're all sweeping down and into this field of active line, this field of diagonal. So as I explore the outside here, I'm noticing thematic repetition, an echo of the figure against the clouds. I'm noticing the clouds become this abstract push of force or of movement or of diagonal that is seconded or is repeated by the narrative structure of the crowd or of the army moving in. And that all of that is bringing me back to the area of the hip. So this is reinforcing, it's bringing me back in to this main figure, which I've described as David here, or the main supporting element for that golden mean. Let's move down a little bit more. I think we just see continued repetitions of that diagonal. And then I get a counter diagonal, which is maybe that main shoulder area, back and shoulder of Goliath. And so Goliath is down here, and then his head is underfoot. His brow is lowered, looking pretty mean down there. And then if I keep going down, right, so you can see how everything hopefully here relates, that all of the hills are moving toward Goliath is kind of counter to that, although he does have a little, maybe that'd be a cloak or a cape behind him. And then if I'm dropped down to the corner, oh, look here, this gets softened again. So there's a shape or a block that's used there to help pull me away from the trap. And then what else pulls me away from the trap? I get the portrait of Goliath. There's also what would probably be his weapon down here, which is some kind of little, maybe it's the hilt to his sword. There's also a bit of saturation, maybe that some blood or something, a little pool of blood there. And then through the leg is like a shoulder or his arm. So this would be something that I feel is pretty normal or routine for Rubens, where we get a lot of these, like space is knotted. This is just an aside, but when you start to break down a lot of things, or a lot of images by the same artist, you'll start to notice their proclivities, right? So I see Rubens is constantly creating this labyrinthine play of space and line, right? Where if something comes out, then we have something coming through, right? And it starts to become it can become very congested in a way. But there's this nodding, which to me is typical of the Baroque, this more elaborate, hysterical play of space and line. So that would be the forearm coming out here. I think that claustrophobic feeling of space helps with the reading of the scene, this charged moment right before he's about to do the killing blow. But you could also look at it a different way. Let's take a step back and try to abstract it out. What is the placement of leg, arm, leg random? Right. So if we think about this leg back here, and then I can also see Goliath's leg back here, or as it kind of foreshortens back. Let's follow it up, and then we'll come back to that thought. I see the cloak, right? There's a kind of this, what we call this a flag fold, with the direction of the robe having some dynamic play, some more diagonals down here, some diaper folds, right? And then we get up to the blade, which I'm just going to draw as another diagonal here. So what is the effect of this? What's happening here from the standpoint of variety? Let's abstract it back to line. Well, I start with the portrait, right? So I'm starting here, and then the tension in this image is the chop, right? It's the killing stroke. So my eye starts to push this way, right? I'm involved in the scene, but what also is happening is there's this hyperfixation on diagonal that speeds up. And look at the distance, the negative space between the sword and Goliath's head. There is that background element, or there is some movement in the background, but for the most part, it's empty. There's not a lot there in terms of the space. That feels like a fast, right? That's a quick read. My eye goes from the top to the head quickly. As I get to the bottom, leg, arm, right? Leg, foot. This starts to feel slow, right? Just think of the pacing between the line. Right? It's more spoke-like. The eye gets slower in through here, and then it's lifted up again. Lift this line to this line, right? To this line. It's like I'm pulling back up into the chop, or I'm pulling back up slowly into that stroke, and then it's fast again. So with line, right, we can create tempo. So pacing, right? Fast versus slow in the area of the picture, right? To produce different qualities of experience. So again, how do I see this relating to foundations? Everybody is practicing straight lines. Everybody is practicing spokes, right? Or doing an exercise like this so that they can put ellipses in. All I'm saying is do the same thing, but consider it also as a component or something that is a quality of storytelling in picture making as well. Practice these within a field or within an area, a frame, to see if you can play with fast and slow, right? In anticipation of more complex compositional arrangements. So we get fast for the chop, slow as it moves back up, but everything here is kind of, I would say, moving around that hip. The hip is the center for that projection of movement, and then even up into the torso, right? The torso itself creates another lean forward. What is the quality of shape? It doesn't seem to have as much like expressionistic bent as we looked at with Egon Schiele, other than sharp for the blade, soft for flesh, hard shape for the armor, soft for flesh. right? This is probably as far as I would take a structure breakdown um, for our purposes in these videos. I think what you could do if you wanted to push this even more would be to like spell out the space. How does line describe and give us space or perspective? So what is the quality of like David's lean? How do the legs move over and around Goliath? For the basic formatting or diagramming of the image, I don't think you need to do this, but you can decide for yourself. And the way that you're going to create your own sense of style is by gravitating to the things that you care about the most. Maybe you hate line, right? I mostly work in line as a teacher and someone that communicates to other people about drawing or painting, but maybe you're just a value person. And so you come to these images only looking for how value is working, or maybe you're a color person. So the value here is light against dark. It's helping produce a focal point. The color is largely used, I would say, as focal point, but also symbolically, right? There's blood around the area where the chop would be, and that gives us some kind of symbolic use for that as well. But this would be just kind of pushing those and taking the image a step further. So hopefully this one gives you another point of contrast against the first two that we looked at. In this one, I'm taking a more complex image, but trying to make it and understand the way that multiple figures coexist in the same space, compositional space, but still beginning from my really basic explanations of how one element continues to build on that unifying. Again, these work in support of one another to create this pretty violency.